My boss put my promotion on hold so his nephew could gain experience. Then he forced me to train him. 3 weeks later, HR dragged them out in front of the whole office, and the CEO announced my name as department lead. That's the ending. But the beginning felt like slow suffocation. Monday started with the usual triage. Before I even reached my cubicle, I resolved a server conflict, calmed an account manager, and authorized a critical vendor payment. Everyone knew who ran operations. The office hummed with the Monday morning energy of people pretending to work, but I was drowning in it. Luis, my department head, stood in his glass doorway and waved me over. He didn't look up from his phone, a move he practiced to assert dominance he didn't possess. I grabbed my notebook, expecting the final confirmation of the role I'd been practically doing for 6 months. I walked in, shut the door, and sat. He looked up, smiling that tight, practiced smile. "Adam, great work on the third quarter numbers," Luis started, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. "Leadership is impressed." He paused, tapping his fingers together. "But we've decided to reassess the department lead position. We want to bring in some fresh energy." The air in the room seemed to thin out. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at a spot on the wall behind my head. "My nephew Connor is joining us. He needs to gain some experience, and I think he's perfect." My stomach tightened, a cold knot forming right behind my ribs. "You want me to train him?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. Luis nodded enthusiastically, mistaking my shock for compliance. "Exactly. Show him the ropes. Let him shadow you on the big accounts." Then he cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. "Actually, there is one more thing. Connor responds well to natural light. It helps his creativity. I'm going to need you to swap desks with him. You can take the cubicle near the printer." The cubicle near the printer was a noise hazard where careers went to die. I looked at Luis, really looked at him, and saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. He was waiting for me to yell, to argue, to give him a reason to label me difficult. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I forced my face into a mask of bored neutrality. "Understood," I said. "Is that all?" Luis blinked, clearly unnerved by the lack of friction. "Yes. That's all." I stood up and walked out, feeling his eyes burning into my back. The office noise rushed back in, but it sounded different now, less like a hum, more like a grinder. I went to my desk, the one with the view of the skyline I'd earned over 5 years, and started putting my items into a box. I wasn't just packing up my stapler and photos. I was packing away my loyalty. The rules had changed, so I prepared to play. The printer rhythm became my new heartbeat: thwack, hiss, thwack. I sat at my exile station, the smell of warm toner filling my nose. It was Tuesday, 10:30 in the morning, and the fresh energy Luis promised had finally decided to show up. Connor walked through the double doors wearing aviator sunglasses, despite the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. He held a lukewarm latte in one hand and a phone in the other. He didn't look nervous about his first day. He looked like he owned the building. Luis practically jogged out of his office to greet him, desperate to please. "Connor, welcome aboard." Connor barely nodded, sliding his glasses up onto his messy hair. He scanned the open floor plan. his eyes skipping over the analysts working hard before landing on me. "So, who's actually in charge around here?" he asked loudly. He ignored his uncle completely, aiming the question at the room to assert dominance. I kept typing, refusing to feed the beast. But the silence in the room was deafening. 20 minutes later, I dragged a spare chair to his desk, my old desk, to start the onboarding process. "This is the client dashboard," I said, pointing to the dual monitors. "It tracks live metrics for our top 3 accounts. If this red line dips, we have exactly 4 minutes to respond before penalties kick in." Connor leaned back, putting his expensive sneakers up on the open drawer. He didn't look at the screen. He was scrolling through Instagram. "Cool," he muttered. "Just send me the PDF." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "It's not a PDF, Connor. It's a live interface. You need to know how to navigate the raw data." He finally looked up, rolling his eyes like I was a nagging parent. "Dude, you are stressing too much. Spreadsheets are old school. I learn by osmosis." He tapped his temple with a grin. "I focus on vibes. If the vibe is off, I'll know. That's why Louise brought me in, to modernize the flow." I didn't blink. I didn't sigh. I simply nodded slowly. Vibes. I stood up and walked back to my cramped desk by the printer. I minimized my email and opened a fresh, encrypted document hidden deep in my personal drive. I named it Insurance Log. My first entry was simple. 11:15 a.m. Trainee refuses to review client dashboard. States he relies on vibes over data. Refuses to take notes. I hit save. And the timestamp locked the moment in place forever. Connor didn't stay at his desk for long. By noon, he was wandering the floor, disrupting actual work. I watched him stop behind Sarah, a senior analyst with 10 years of experience. She was drafting a complex compliance email. Connor leaned over her shoulder, sipping his drink loudly. "You should use more exclamation points," he said, pointing at her screen with a sticky finger. "It makes the brand feel more accessible." "You sound like a robot." Sarah froze, her hands hovering over the keys. She looked at me across the room, her eyes wide with a plea for help. "Fix this," her expression begged. "Make him stop." Usually, I would have intervened. I would have pulled him away and explained, professional tone. Today, I did nothing. I turned back to my screen and typed another entry into the log. The office atmosphere shifted from curiosity to a heavy, suffocating dread. They realized I wasn't going to save them anymore. The chaos had officially arrived. Wednesday brought the inevitable test. The Alpha project file transfer was due at 2 p.m. sharp. It was a routine task, but a critical one involving secure banking protocols. I drafted an email to Connor at 9 a.m., stripping away all ambiguity. "Attached is the encrypted data set," I wrote. "Upload to the client portal by noon. Confirmation is required." I CC'd Luis, ensuring the chain of command was visible. I hit send and watched the digital paper trail begin. Connor barely glanced at his notification. He was too busy planning a strategy lunch with a friend from marketing. "Got it, Chief?" he shouted across the room without opening the attachment. At 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the internal cutoff, his chair was spinning empty. He had left for sushi. I sat at my printer desk, watching the clock tick. Every instinct screamed at me to do it myself. Instead, I opened my log and typed 11:50 a.m., desk empty. 2 o'clock arrived with the shrill ring of the emergency line. It was the client, and they weren't happy. The red light on the receiver blinked like a warning beacon. Louis snatched the handset up in his glass office. I could see him nodding, then freezing, then sweating. He slammed the phone down and stormed out, his face blotchy with panic. The office went silent. Everyone knew exactly what had happened, and they knew exactly who Louis was going to blame. "Adam," Louise bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "The client says the portal is empty. Why didn't you supervise the upload?" He didn't ask Connor, who had just strolled back and holding a takeout bag. He came for me. "I told you to guide him," Louis hissed, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. "This negligence is on you. You are the senior analyst. If the data isn't there, it's because you failed to manage your resource properly." I didn't flinch or apologize. I simply swiveled my monitor so the screen faced the aisle. "I sent the assignment at 9 a.m., I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I copied you, Louis. You replied great at 9:05. I tapped a key, forwarding the thread to the entire team to verify the timeline. Phones dinged in unison across the room. It was the sound of undeniable proof landing in 20 inboxes simultaneously. The room held its breath. Louis stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He couldn't yell at the timestamps. He couldn't argue with his own reply. The narrative he tried to spin, that I was lazy, shattered against the hard wall of documentation. "Right," he muttered, deflating instantly. "Must have been a technical glitch. I'll handle the client." He turned and marched back to his office, but the look he gave me wasn't fear. It was pure hatred. Later, Ethan stopped by my desk under the guise of grabbing a printout. He didn't look at me, keeping his eyes on the paper. "Watch your back," he whispered. "I saw a draft on the shared drive. Louis is rewriting your job description." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "It includes administrative support for leadership trainees," Ethan added. I realized then that defense wasn't enough. I had to let the whole building burn. The second week began with a morning huddle that felt more like a hostage situation. We stood in a jagged circle near the break room, clutching mugs of bitter office coffee. Connor leaned against the counter, chewing gum loudly, while Louise droned on about synergy. When the topic of client intakes came up, Connor pointed a thumb in my direction. "Don't worry about the heavy lifting," he announced to the room. "Adam is basically my assistant while I focus on the big picture." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Sarah looked at her shoes, and Ethan coughed to cover a cringe. A month ago, I would have corrected him with a joke or a firm clarification. Today, I just uncacked my pen. I wrote the exact quote in my notebook, date and time included, while Connor smirked at his own wit. I didn't give him the fight he wanted. I gave him enough rope to hang himself. Tuesday brought the modernization memo. Louis flagged an email high priority, attaching a document titled Streamlined Operations Version 1. "Connor and I have rethought the compliance checks." Louis shouted from his doorway, beaming like a proud father. I opened the file and felt my blood pressure spike. It wasn't just inefficient. It was dangerous. They wanted to bypass the legal review stage for orders under $10,000 to speed up velocity. It was a direct violation of federal auditing standards. I walked to Luis's office, the printout in hand. Connor was sitting on the edge of the desk, tossing a stress ball. "This removes the legal safeguard," I said, keeping my tone flat and bureaucratic. "If we get audited, we have no paper trail." Connor laughed, catching the ball. "You worry too much about what ifs. It's about agility." Louis nodded in agreement. "Just implement it, Adam. We don't need roadblocks. We need flow." "I need that instruction confirmed via email," I said, backing out of the room. "Just so I can update recipes accurately." Louise rolled his eyes but typed out the confirmation within minutes. "Proceed with the new threshold immediately." Asterisk, I didn't just save it to my inbox. I dragged the file into an encrypted folder on an external drive, along with the original policy they were violating. It wasn't just a bad management decision anymore, it was documented corporate negligence. By Thursday, the cracks in the hull were visible to everyone. Orders were shipping, without tax ID verification. And the system was flagging errors every hour. I saw Marcus, a junior admin fresh out of college, reaching for the phone to correct a missing invoice code on one of Connor's accounts. He looked terrified, trying to patch the leak before anyone noticed. It was the exact kind of silent heroism that kept this department running, and it had to stop. I rolled my chair over, stopping Marcus's hand before he could lift the receiver. He looked up, confused by my grip on his wrist. "Don't fix it," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the HVA fee. "But the client will get the wrong bill," he stammered. "I know," I said, releasing him and leaning back. "Let it stand. They need to see the cost of the vibe." The error remained, flashing red on his screen. It was 4 p.m. on Thursday when the trap officially snapped shut. Louis marched to my printer, side exile, dropping a thick manila folder onto my keyboard with a heavy thud. Dust motes danced in the slant of afternoon sun, highlighting the sweat on his forehead. "I need you to take over the Gamma project," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's due to the client at 9 a.m. tomorrow." He checked his watch, feigning business. "Connor has been too swamped with high-level strategy to format the data." I opened the folder, and the smell of disaster wafted out. It wasn't just a formatting job. The raw data sheets were incomplete, and the projection models were based on last year's interest rates. This was easily 12 hours of reconstruction work. "This is a ground-up rebuild, Louis," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's barely started." Louis shrugged, already backing away toward his office. "You're the fixer, Adam. Fix it. Just make sure Connor gets the final copy to submit." By 6 p.m., the office was a ghost town. The cleaning crew vacuumed around me, the rhythmic hum matching the pounding in my temples. I dove into the digital files, and what I found turned my fatigue into cold rage. The data hadn't just been neglected, it had been tampered with. Connor had tried to manually adjust cells to make the graph look prettier, corrupting the underlying formulas. He had effectively broken the mathematical reality of the project. I didn't panic. I worked. I pulled the backup archives from the server, bypassing Connor's local saves entirely. I rebuilt the pivot tables, corrected the interest rate variables, and generated a new, flawless projection model. It was the kind of deep, precise work I loved, the kind that kept this company solvent. By 2 a.m., the Gamma project wasn't just fixed, it was bulletproof. My eyes burned, but my mind was razor sharp. I was ready to close the loop. Louise had given me a specific instruction: send the final file to Connor so he could submit it. I ignored that order completely. I uploaded the final packet directly to the secure client server using my own credentials. Then, I attached a digital signature to the file metadata, authored by Adam R. 2:15 a.m. I sent a confirmation email to Louise, carbon copying the client liaison. Gamma project, uploaded directly to ensure data integrity. Correction of corrupted formulas completed. I wasn't done. I navigated to the department's shared drive to archive my work log. In the management subfolder, which Louise often forgot was viewable by senior analysts, I saw a file modified earlier that day. It was a draft email addressed to HR. The subject line read Performance Improvement Plan Adam. I clicked it open. The text detailed my failure to complete the Gamma project and my unwillingness to support junior leadership. The timestamp on the draft was 2:30 p.m. Louise had written my termination notice an hour and a half before he even assigned me the project. He never intended for me to finish it. He needed a scapegoat for the mess Connor created. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in the dark office. I hit print. The page slid out of the tray with a soft hiss. I held the paper. It was no longer just a job, it was evidence. I didn't sleep. I showered in the gym downstairs, put on my crispest white shirt, and returned to my desk at 8 a.m. The office was waking up, oblivious to the bomb I was constructing. I took a 3-ring binder from my supply drawer, the black vinyl kind used for final reports. I didn't label the spine or the cover. Inside, I placed the timestamped logs, the illegal compliance memos, and the printed draft of my termination letter. It wasn't just a complaint, it was a formal indictment. I walked to HR at 9 a.m. sharp. Isabella, the HR director, looked up with a polite, practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She expected a salary negotiation or a conflict mediation, the usual Friday morning fare. I have a serious concern regarding operational liability, I said, placing the heavy binder on her desk. The thud was satisfyingly solid. This isn't a personal grievance, Isabella. This is a documentation of federal compliance violations and verifiable data corruption. Her smile vanished instantly. She opened the binder, her manicured fingers hesitating on the first tab. I walked her through the initial timeline, pointing to the log of missed trainings and refused tasks. For 3 weeks, the department has paid a senior salary for 0 output, I explained calmly. But that is an internal budgeting issue. The real problem starts here. I flipped the page to the modernization memo. Louise authorized bypassing federal audit checks last Tuesday. That puts the company's operating license at immediate risk. Isabella read the email chain twice, her face paling as she recognized the legal exposure. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. "Did you execute these orders?" she asked, her voice tight. No, I replied, sliding the rejection email across the table. I refused in writing. However, the instruction remains active for other employees. I watched her realize that I wasn't just reporting a bad boss, I was saving her department from a federal investigation. But this is the key piece, I said, turning to the final section. I laid out the timestamped logs of the Gamma Project repair alongside Luis's pre-written termination letter. He drafted my firing for failure to complete a project he hadn't even assigned yet. I let that sink in. This proves malicious intent to defraud the company of a competent employee to cover for family nepotism. It was the kill shot. It proved Luis wasn't just incompetent, he was actively sabotaging the firm. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the server rack in the closet. Isabella closed the binder, slowly, treating it like a loaded gun. She looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in 5 years. I wasn't Adam the quiet analyst anymore. I was a witness who had brought irrefutable receipts. You have documented this impeccably, she whispered. If this went to an external labor board, we would be defenseless. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with nervous energy. Adam, I need you to go back to your desk, she instructed, her tone shifting to professional steel. Do not speak to Luis. Do not speak to Connor. Do not discuss this meeting. She moved the binder to her secure locking cabinet behind her desk. We take allegations of retaliation and compliance breaches very seriously. You have done the right thing. It was the corporate code for "We are about to burn them down." I walked out of her office, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. As I passed the reception desk, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The CEO's executive assistant, a woman who rarely left the top floor, stepped out. She was carrying a thick notepad and walking straight toward Isabella's door. We locked eyes for a split second, and she gave a curt nod. This wasn't just an HR issue anymore. The executive tower was involved. The walk back to my desk felt like moving through water. The office was loud with the morning rush, phones ringing and keyboards clacking. Luis was standing by the coffee machine, laughing loudly at something Connor had said. He saw me and smirked, lifting his mug in a mock toast. He thought I was a dead man walking, waiting for the axe to fall. He had no idea I had just severed the rope, holding his entire guillotine blade. I sat down at my cramped desk by the printer. The heat from the machine was stifling, but I felt cold. I unlocked my screen and saw a new email from Luis, urgent, Gamma, project status. He was still trying to build his paper trail, unaware the ink was already dry on his own verdict. I didn't reply. I just folded my hands on the desk and waited for the inevitable explosion. The silence before the storm was absolutely terrifying. It started at 1 p.m. 2 uniformed security officers stepped off the elevator. They weren't the usual night watchmen. These were external contractors with earpieces and grim expressions. The office chatter died instantly, replaced by the hum of cooling fans. Everyone watched, assuming they were coming for me, the guy who had been quietly demoted to the printer desk. Even Ethan stopped typing to stare. But the officers didn't turn toward the cubicles. They walked straight past me, marching in lockstep toward the glass fishbowl where Luis was holding court. Louis stood up, smiling at first, thinking they were lost. Then Isabella appeared behind them, holding a clipboard like a shield. I saw Louis's face drop from confusion to pale terror in a single second. He tried to close the door, but one of the guards blocked it with a heavy boot. Connor, oblivious as always, was still leaning back in his chair, with his feet up. He didn't react until the guard tapped his shoulder and pointed firmly at the door. The performance of power was over. The soundproof glass couldn't contain the volume. Connor's voice cracked through the silence first.
You can't do this!
Do you know who my family is? He sounded less like an executive and more like a toddler denied a toy. Louis was frantic, his hands waving in jerky, pleading motions as he tried to argue with Isabella. He pointed at me, then at his computer, desperate to shift the narrative. Isabella didn't argue. She just signaled the guards. They weren't there to debate. They were there to extract. They were marched out into the main aisle. Connor tried to grab his company laptop from the desk, but the guard intercepted his hand mid-air. Company property remains on site. The officer barked, loud enough for the back row to hear. Connor flushed a deep, blotchy red. Louise walked behind him, head down, refusing to make eye contact with the team he had terrorized for years. He clutched his personal keys like a lifeline. The procession moved past my desk, a parade of failure leaving the building. The elevator doors closed, sealing them away. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unasked questions. Nobody cheered. Corporate executions are rarely loud. They are just sudden and final. My inbox pinged with a notification from IT Access. Rights revoked. Louis G. Connor M. It was the digital death knell. Sarah looked over her monitor at me, her eyes wide. What did you do? She mouthed silently. I didn't answer. I just opened a new spreadsheet and went back to work. The air felt cleaner. The weekend passed in a blur of speculation. Group chats exploded with theories, but I stayed offline. Monday morning felt like walking into a haunted house. Luce's office was dark, the blinds drawn tight. Connor's desk was already cleared, wiped clean of his personality, as if he had never existed. We worked in a strange limbo, reporting to no one. Every time the phone rang, heads snapped up. We were waiting for the other shoe to drop. We assumed the department would be dissolved or restructured entirely. Tuesday morning brought the real shock. At 9 a.m., the CEO walked onto the floor. He didn't have an entourage, just a single notebook. He was a legend in the industry, a man who spoke in quiet tones and moved mountains. He walked slowly down the aisle, inspecting the rows of analysts. He didn't look angry. He looked surgical. He stopped at the empty leadership office, stared at the dark glass for a moment, and then turned. He walked straight toward my desk by the printer. I stood up, smoothing my shirt. The CEO didn't offer a handshake. He gestured to my monitor. "Show me the Gamma project logs," he said softly. I navigated to the secure folder, bringing up the timestamped upload and the metadata showing my authorship. He leaned in, reading the raw code. "And the compliance bypass?" he asked. I pulled up the rejected memo and the original federal statute I had cited. He nodded once, a sharp, precise movement. "You kept the receipts?" he murmured. "Good." He straightened up and looked me in the eye. I've been watching the server traffic for 2 weeks, he revealed. I saw the IP addresses. I knew the work was coming from your terminal, not the corner office. My breath caught. He hadn't been blind. He had been gathering evidence just like me. I needed to see if you would break or if you would stand your ground, he added. Competence is common, Adam. Integrity under pressure is rare. You protected the firm. He turned to the room, clapping his hands once to gather attention. Everyone, center floor. Now, the team assembled quickly, forming a nervous circle around us. The CEO stood next to me, not in front of me. He looked at the faces of the people who had survived the chaos. Effective immediately, the operational structure of this department is changing, he announced, his voice carrying to the back corners. He placed a hand on the back of my chair. We are correcting a mistake. Luis is no longer with the organization, the CEO stated, his voice devoid of pity. He didn't offer excuses or corporate jargon to soften the blow. He simply gestured to the empty glass office and then turned back to me. We need leadership that understands the mechanics of this business, not just the theory. Effective immediately. Adam is your department lead. The words hung in the air, heavy and real. I didn't smile or cheer. I just felt the weight of the responsibility landing on my shoulders where it belonged. The silence broke, not with polite applause, but with a collective exhale of relief. Ethan let out a short, incredulous laugh, shaking his head, as if he couldn't believe justice actually happened. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek, smiling openly for the first time in months. It wasn't a celebration of a title, it was the realization that the chaos was over. The CEO shook my hand firmly, a seal of approval that meant more than any bonus. Get them back on track, Adam, he said. I didn't make a speech. I didn't stand on a chair or promise a new era of synergy. I simply turned to the group and looked at Marcus, who was still holding a stack of unfiled invoices. Marcus, unlock the pending queue, I said, my voice steady. Ethan, run the audit script we discussed last month. Sarah, let's clear the client backlog. The room sprang into action. It was the sound of an engine finally firing on all cylinders. The friction was gone. We were working again. Later that afternoon, I moved my single cardboard box from the printer desk to the corner office. The glass room still smelled faintly of Luis's expensive cologne and desperation. I set my box down on the mahogany desk, the surface free of dust for the first time in years. I walked to the window, the one Connor had coveted for his vibes. The city skyline was gray and industrial, but it looked beautiful. I reached for the blinds, which had been drawn tight for weeks, and pulled the cord. Light flooded the room, bleaching out the shadows of the previous regime. As I sat down in the ergonomic chair, my foot bumped something heavy under the desk. I reached down and pulled out the metal trash bin. Resting on top of a pile of shredded paper was Luis's Leadership Excellence plaque. The glass face was cracked down the middle, likely from when he packed his things in a panic. I looked at the fractured award, a monument to ego over effort. I didn't feel angry anymore. I left the plaque in the trash, where it belonged. For years, I believed that if I kept my head down, the system would eventually reward me. I was wrong. The system doesn't reward silence, it exploits it. I had to break the machine to fix it, and I had to document every fracture. I opened my laptop, the screen bright and waiting. I didn't open a complaint log or a defense file. I opened the fourth quarter projection sheet. I typed my name at the top, department lead.